Tom Soroka, and I'm so glad that you're with us this evening. Our show is being live streamed right now at YouTube and Facebook, so you can just go to the Ancient Faith Ministries page and watch, and more importantly, join in the conversation during the live show to give your comments. You can also send us a text message directly to 412-206-5012. So if you'd like to send us a text message, please feel free to do that. 412-206-5012. And of course, this is a call-in show, so we'd love to hear from you. 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. So let's get started. It's appropriate that during this fourth week of the Great Lenten season, which is the midpoint of the fast, we contemplate the meaning of the cross and the crucifixion of Christ. And so we are happy to welcome two guests who are well known to Ancient Faith listeners and viewers, and they have written an outstanding book, which considers what are often called the last 7 words of Christ on the cross. Now, these words are life-giving to us. They are given to us at probably the most powerful moment in salvation history. It is the moment to which everything was heading, when God himself hung on the cross for the sake of our salvation, recreating the world in himself. And so we're going to ponder these magnificent phrases that are uttered by our Lord, and we're going to talk about it in terms of giving hope to those who are in despair, for those who are trapped in the darkness of life, the darkness of the difficulty of the world. And I cannot think of two people who are more qualified than our guests this evening. Reverend Dr. Nicholas Louh is the pastor of St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church in Jacksonville, Florida. And Dr. Roxanne Louh is a licensed psychologist who is also practicing in Jacksonville. And together they've authored yet another new book, an outstanding book called 6 Hours, 7 Lessons: How Christ Light Transcends Our Darkness. Now, this is a kind of continuation, you might say, of their previous book, an incredible book called Renewing You, a priest, a psychologist, and a plan. Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne, welcome to Ancient Faith today.
Thanks so much for having us, Father Tom.
Thank you, Father Tom. It's an honor to be with you, brother.
And thank you for your patience. I know that we had to change the schedule a little bit, so I really appreciate your understanding with that.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
Of course, I want to ask the most obvious question, and that is, it's like everybody has a motivation for writing books, and I know your books, actually, it's amazing. You do not profit from these books at all. You put this money into various ministries and important things that you work toward. So why put so much work into a book that really, you don't have any sort of personal gain from? What is motivating you to write this book, both of you? Of course, this evening, I'm going to say you in the plural. And what do you hope that this book will accomplish? Father Nicholas, could we start with you?
Sure. I mean, first of all, we, again, thanks so much, Father Tom, for having us on your show, and thanks to all the listeners and viewers tonight. I think for us, our ministry bore out of, years and years ago when we were, I think if you were to ask Roxanne, I'm sure, honey, you would say the same thing, that, 10, 12 years ago, if you were to tell us that we would be, on an Ancient Faith live show and we would have written some books, I don't know if that would have been something that we would have been foreseeing happening. With that said, early on in our ministry, Father Tom, it became a sometimes I would ask Roxanne, I'm doing a sermon, it's Forgiveness Sunday, and, I all the time talk about forgiveness, but what are some practical steps that people can do to do that, and then marriage, and also vice versa. Roxanne would have certain clients that would come in and they would want a Christian perspective on things, and she'd ask me, "Hey, Nick, how do we handle this? Or what would you say the church says this, or the scriptures teach this?" And it kind of really organically grew from there. Ultimately, as you beautifully stated earlier, is that really the impetus to the books that we have written is that we never want this to be about us. It's all about Christ. And we're so adamant about that. And for that reason, our fathers were very big inspirations in both of our lives, our moms as well. But our fathers were diagnosed with cancer the same exact week. And prior to that, we're in great shape. My father had a massive seizure on a Monday. Roxanne's father went in for a routine hernia surgery, and then only to be diagnosed with cancer when they opened him up. And they would die about 8 months apart. And for us as a priest and psychologist, on paper, Father Tom, you know this, we're called, you have a priest, you have a psychologist, you'd think that you'd be able to kind of navigate those difficulties. And let us give out this qualifier as well to say that, there are many people that deal with a lot more than what we deal with our dads. But having said that, we struggled a great deal with just simply being able to kind of deal with what we were struggling with, and how do we apply what we've learned in books and even in some levels of experience. And that really bore the first book, Renewing You, because how do we take the things that we're struggling with and put some what we call practical Christianity? How do we truly give some practical steps to deal with the dark seasons of life? And later on, once Renewing You was out, we were very adamant. Roxanne had prayed about this, and we both had agreed that when the book would be published, that all the proceeds none of it would come to us. And we're not looking for any accolades in saying that. We just simply are sharing that that half of the proceeds of the book would go to the American Cancer Society in honor of our dads, because all of us have been impacted by cancer, whether physically or knowing someone else. And then the other half would go to ministries within our church. And so, in fact, yesterday at our parish council meeting, we had given a check to the church for that. So it's just something that we can give back. We're just simply utilizing the gifts that God's given us and really the experiences that we went through to make a difference in this world. And, I don't know, Roxanne, if you want to add
Thank you very much. Yeah. I appreciate that. Dr. Roxanne, the ministry that you have, obviously it is a ministry in every sense of the word, but also can you just tell me a little bit, and I'm asking for a little bit of vulnerability here, because obviously those of us who are priests and that are married, our wives do not always get the recognition that they deserve, right? And in your particular case, it seems to me that you have a very thriving, helpful ministry to your husbands, right? So what is it like working as a team like this? I know that you obviously have your separate work, right? But you have come together for this book, and give us a little peek into that. What is it like? Is it, you are dealing with two spheres of information and influence, some of which overlaps, some of which may collide, right? So how do you make that work on a day-to-day basis, on a week-to-week basis, where you are able to produce very helpful books and still kind of maintain, your own professional life, a team, obviously, at church. I know your choir director very well. She was in my youth group in Louisville. And your church is thriving. So just tell me a little bit about what that is like and what it has been like, where you are both very well accomplished professionals, but also working together as a team.
I mean, I guess the best word I'd have for it is just that it's been an incredible blessing I never could have predicted. I mean, never in a million years would I have ever expected that we would merge what we do. And now I can't separate it. You know, everything that I look at in terms of the problems I see in a person, in the world, in myself, in my struggles, in my parenting, in my, you know, it's so merged and intertwined. I no longer know what side is what and where it's coming from, because the answers just sort of have landed and merged in a way that informs a new perspective. It's like something new was born. And I think it's been a really neat blessing and opportunity. It's grown me a lot. I don't look at a client the same way that I did 20 years ago. I have a very different approach for everything that I do now. And probably the most incredible way it comes together is on these sort of runs that I'll do in the morning. It's as if every problem that I was dealing with in myself, which are many, and in a client I'm working with that I'm, you know, struggling with, in that run, in that space, in prayer and contemplation and thinking and the merging of everything, the answers seem to just come together. And I feel like there's a blog to be written. There's a chapter here. There's we've just got to get this out there. You know, we got to do something with it. And so I almost feel like this was God's plan, you know, like use the study of human behavior to help the flesh, you know, because the spirit is relying on it as a vehicle to go do what I want it to do. But if you're not aware of that flesh, if you don't know how to lead it or sort of make it disciplined to the spirit, it really throws us off. And so I sort of feel like it's a little bit, you know, God's gift to us, you know, he kind of said, hey, you're going to put these things together and make it work for me, you know, for what I want people to do in the world.
We appreciate it that it has worked out that way. And you are, in a way, paving a very important road because, you know, there are many views on modern psychology. And I know, you know, you can speak about psychology as a whole, but it's not really monolithic, right? But to take the best of both worlds and somehow allow them to inform people, I think is a wonderful thing. So thank you all for opening up a bit about that. We really appreciate it. All right, let's remind our listeners, 1-855-AF-RADIO. We'd love to hear from you. Excuse me, I have a cold because why? Well, it's the middle of Lent. And of course, I would have a cold during the middle of Lent. You know, it's just almost inevitable. No, of course. At least it's not Holy Week. So, and then also you can give us a text message at 412-206-5012. All right. So let's talk about the book and let's talk about the themes of the book. And the first thing, you know, you say in the introduction that you are answering using these life-giving words, as we said, of Christ on the cross as a light to give hope to those who are in darkness, to those who are in the darkness of despair, right? So I want to ask you about despair because as a priest, I get a lot of people, and I've been a priest now for 24 years. You can see the increase in the naming of, I feel hopeless, I feel lost, I feel depressed, I feel, and then they say despair. And it seems to me like these are degrees, but we're using these words very intentionally. So my first question to both of you, and maybe Dr. Roxanne, we'll start with you. Is there a difference, or how can we tell the difference between simply being down, right? Because I have a cold, or, you know, I'm tired, or something didn't go my way, and true despair. And then Dr. Father Nicholas, I would like to ask you also, why is this on the rise? So again, what's the difference between being down as opposed to despair, or just being like depressed and I'm not diminishing that. And then, Father Nicholas, why is this on the rise? Dr. Roxanne?
Yeah. So, I think we all run into situations that make us feel disappointed, but two paths can come out of disappointment or unexpected challenges. One that says, well, it's not because of me, and I don't expect every situation to be this way, so I'm ready to embark on other challenges and wait for the next open door. Or the path that says, it happened because of me. Something I lack, something that I did was is going to keep me experiencing this disappointment in every circumstance I go into for the rest of my life. So now not just one domino has fallen in my life, every domino has fallen because I'm the one creating, the disappointment. I'm the one who is inadequate. I'm the one who doesn't have what it takes, to overcome. And so it's really the way that we think about our circumstances, even if it's depression, right? So we have an episode of depression. Well, how I think about that episode is either going to bring me out of it quicker and maybe have it not go as deep and give me hope for my future and still believe in the promises and the plans God has for me, than if I think about it as this is forever. I'm never going to get out of this. I can never going to be able to do anything. In fact, I have nothing to offer this world. And so really it's the frame that we give ourselves. And when faith is no part of that, we lose sight of what God is yearning to do within that, which is often to connect to us more deeply, because we weren't meant to deal with disappointment alone. We were never meant to, as Nick likes to say, if we were only given what we could handle, we would never need Christ. We would never need God. We would just manage everything on our own. And so disappointment and depression and all of these sort of difficult moments are meant to call us into a deeper space with Him and grow us and transform us in some way. And so, I think that's the difference. This is how we frame it, what we do with it.
That's very, very helpful. It really is. And Father Nick, just on that, I don't know if you are hearing this also in confessions, and of course, we don't really talk about confession per se, but I'm hearing it a lot. So what are you hearing the same thing? We seem to be hearing it in the news, statistics, mental health crisis, our youth. People, you have the increase in, astonishingly, in Canada and in the Netherlands, the increase of euthanasia among those who have mental illnesses. Like 28-year-old, there's a very famous one right now, 28 years old, and she wants to end her life because of, I think she has autism, and it's apparently, not life-threatening, but to her it is. So what's happening here? Are we just focusing in on it more, or is this really happening?
I think it's probably a little bit of both, Father Tom. I think for what's happening, I think on a purely macro level is what we're seeing is that people have access, obviously, to a lot more information now. We're having access to what we're seeing on the news, where, 20, 30 years ago, we were having, one news station, or 2 or 3 news stations. Now we've got multiple ones. They're running 24 hours a day. There's breaking news stories, quote unquote, breaking news stories happening all the time, which may not necessarily be breaking news stories as we used to understand those to be. Then you look at the world that we're in, social media, the opportunities that people have. Then you look at statistics on how much we're working now, how much we're, how few of us, how the statistics are that we're reading the Bible now less than we did years and years ago. We're eating dinner together less than we've done years ago as a family. I think I remember reading once that the average cleanup time for a dinner is 4 minutes, and that's because many people are eating by themselves who live within families. So, I think that at the end of the day, you and I would recognize this, and obviously the church and the scriptures teach about this, is that this is a spiritual battle. We saw a little bit of it with COVID-19, and one of the great guides that the enemy uses, one of the tools on his tool belt, if you will, is to create division, distance between us and Christ. So what are the things that I think that are possibly causing it, other than what I mentioned earlier with the what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what we're watching, is also not living in balance, not having the right tools in our life, not wanting to be, not listening to the right voices. I mean, and I think also I would say is what's also creating of this is that we have kind of bought into this lie, Father Tom, that that earth is supposed to be heaven, and God's rescue plan wasn't to get us into earth. His rescue plan was to get us out of earth into heaven. And if we recognize that in his final statements that he's making right before the cross in John chapter 16, which we'll read during Holy Week, when he's giving this final prayer at the Last Supper to his disciples, and he's saying to them that, listen, I love you so much, but every one of you are going to suffer horrific deaths. You're going to be killed. You're going to be thrown out of the prison. And then he gives this extraordinary statement in John 16:33, where he says, but take heart, I've overcome this world. So I think when we are listening to the wrong voices that are telling us that, it's the end times, and not that they may not be, but we shouldn't be living as if, or when we're living that we have got more work to do, or busyness, or not having the tools, or not having the right, being active in the house of God. When we're not having those opportunities, it's great fertilizer for the enemy to grow his own deception and his own lies in our lives. And so when there's Aristotle once said that nature hates a vacuum. Well, when there's a vacuum of our life without God in our life, something else is going to come in. And that's what we're seeing now, I think.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So you mentioned about this division between people and families and so forth. And one of the sections of your book, which I thought it was honestly very is very insightful, that you were speaking about this idea of where Jesus says to John, right, behold your mother, right? Mm-hmm. And this idea that one of the important things is the connection that we have with one another. Can we talk a little bit about that? It seems to me that this is a really important subject today. There has been a lot said on this program, I know on your program, about the tremendous number of converts that we've had in the last 2 or 3 years. And Father Nick, you mentioned about COVID, and no doubt social media is generating that. COVID is generating that. The social changes and values are generating people looking for something, right? But here's what I'm finding. The people that really want this, they're coming to our churches, but a lot of them are having difficulty with this issue of connection, with connecting with each other. And I love that you also talked about extroverts versus introverts, because as I was reading it, I was like, no, wait a second, because I'm seeing so many people that, even young people, like they don't have the basic skills to come to coffee hour and meet someone or make a relationship or whatever. So I guess the question is, what's harmful? Can you talk a little bit about this importance of relationships and connections? And I know there's a whole spectrum here, right? But again, are you seeing this in your communities where the people that are coming to our church, or the people that used to come to church and now they're not interested in being with one another? There's just the central idea of making connections with other people has really gone down. We don't know our neighbors. We don't have clubs or organizations. So, how can we get better at this? How can we really walk people through this and say, this is really important, and if you're having problems with this or that, like, here's what you can do. I know that's sort of, I'm throwing a lot at you, but walk us through the importance of connection. Dr. Roxanne, could we start with you? Because I do want to ask you about the introvert and extrovert, and I love that you said in the book that introverts, it's just not that they don't want to have connections with people. It's that they want certain things. They see it, in terms of experience, right? With just a few people. Because I've been trying to wrap my brain around that too. I'm very extroverted. Like, put me in a huge room and I'll work the room and I'll have fun and I'll meet people. But it's like introverts, they just don't want to do that. So help me understand this.
Yeah. So introverts really derive energy from solitude. They have a very rich inner world and they love to live in it. And they want to live in also somebody else's inner world, the vastness of somebody else's inner world. So they like to connect on a deeper level. They tend to find outside stimulation too, like noise and motion and intrusive lighting, very frustrating. Too much external stimulation is really going to drain them and distract and derail their focus. And they even prefer to be in their own environment where they can actually adjust the environment, the air, the lighting, to kind of be just right. So that they can enjoy the vastness of their inner world. And they might be described as a little bit more reserved, and they prefer time for that sort of contemplation. And they might be the types to, here's the thing, so they're going to be inner processors. So they're going to think things through in their head rather than out loud with you as they're thinking them. They're going to want to deliver you the final goods at the end of that piece. And so they do prefer to observe from the sidelines. They might be in your coffee hour in the periphery of the room, because they would hate being the center of attention. They would hate to be called out or asked to answer a question amidst everybody. And extroverts are, you're probably exactly the opposite. You derive energy from the people that you're around, right? And outside stimulation probably doesn't bother you. It's probably exciting. And you may be more likely to sort of talk out things with people, right? So, and so it's really two completely different sort of dispositions. I am an introvert and Nick is an extrovert. And so,
wow.
Yeah, we are polar opposite on that spectrum, and so it's really fun. He loves coffee hour. He just walks right in and maneuvers beautifully, and everybody's talking. He knows how to move from one person to the next, and I'm like,
sure.
I study it like, wow, how does he do that? I'm just like,
that's seminary training, right?
I'm like,
that's
if people are talking about the weather, I don't really know where to go from there because I want to have a deep discussion, and so, yeah. So, also here's the thing. So our phones and this sort of dopamine rush we get from sort of instant gratification is also derailing us. So I was sitting at a light this morning, okay? And somebody wanted to cross the road, and we're sitting at this intersection, and the person in front of me is looking down at their phone at the stoplight. Somebody is wanting to cross and trying to make eye contact to see, does the driver see me? Like, I don't want to walk because I have a baby. And the driver in front of me is looking at their phone down the entire time. Never makes contact with this poor mom who's in the middle of the street just trying to get their attention. And I thought to myself, this epitomizes our world. We used to, at a red light, before phones, what did we do? We looked up, we looked around, we saw our environment, we connected with our environment, even if it was the mother trying to cross the street. Whether introvert or extrovert, we made contact with our environment. And that is not something that we are used to doing, because the dopamine rush we get from an instant, gratification of checking an email or, quickly going through our to-do list or whatever it is on our phone, is so much more rewarding than the dopamine we feel from just kind of looking up and looking at nature. Nobody looks outside of an airplane window anymore. So I do feel the technology since 2007, when the iPhone was invented, I feel connection has really dropped since then. Whether you're an introvert or extrovert, it's just made it so much more difficult. And behind the phone, you can disguise your perception. You can create the perception you want, the persona. You can fix things with filters and say things in just the right way. Well, in person, you can't do any of that. Just like on a live show, you're going to say things that maybe make sense. Sometimes they don't. And then you have to deal with the burden of perception. How am I being perceived? And I don't want to overthink that, So those are all the things going on in a coffee hour, overthinking, not knowing how to, who's going to talk about something more than the weather, or someone, are they going to like me? And it's tough. And I don't think we have good tools, because of technology.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I almost feel like introvert and extrovert, obviously it was always some kind of psychological profile, right? But it wasn't really a thing. It wasn't like you had this label, oh, he's an introvert, he's an extrovert, and now we sort of pick and choose what we want to do and who we want to sit with or not sit with, depending on whether they are extroverted or introverted. So, Father Nick, let's talk a little bit about connection from the standpoint of being members of the body of Christ, because this provides a real challenge for some people. As Dr. Roxanne said, we are an age of social media, and so a lot of these people, obviously young men, are learning about orthodoxy online, and they're really having difficulty making that leap to actually visit a church. And then once they visit a church, they may not have the social skills to be able to engage. Why? I really want to talk about it sort of from a theological standpoint and a practical standpoint. Why is it important to gather together? Why is it important to have these, as you put in your book, connections? And, what happens if we don't? Like, can we be a lone Christian that just sits in the back, doesn't talk to anybody, comes, goes, that's it?
I think that one of the beautiful things, our God is such an amazing God that, he didn't have to create a church. He didn't have to be the head of the church. He created a church so that, in the scriptures talk about this. St. Paul says that first of all, he says that that Christ himself would go to the temple. That was the custom at that time, as the scriptures talk about. And we hear about how St. Paul says that we should always make time for us to come together as a body of believers. And we hear in the book of Psalms that, behold, how great it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. And if we just kind of go from that to the time of the cross, Father Tom, which I know you know so well, and I really want to remind our listeners, because in a few weeks from right now, the Orthodox will be celebrating our Holy Week and Easter. But, the Gospel of John, unlike all the other Gospels, spends more time on what we would call Holy Week or Great Week than any of the other Gospels. In fact, there are a number of chapters that are simply 5 chapters actually, are on Holy Week. And what we see in those 5 chapters from John 13 to 17 are chapters, and we highlight this obviously in the book, is this repetitive message from Christ that we need one another. We see in John 13 where Jesus is washing the feet, and he's saying that I want you to do that for each other. In other words, we need people that are going to care for one another. And we can go chapter by chapter, but the point I'm making is that he valued so much all of us being as one. And in the scriptures it says, again, St. Paul says that we should make every effort to come together as one. And as Roxanne and you were saying, Father Tom, both beautifully, the reality is that we're all different personalities. Not everyone is going to be able to get on a show and do a podcast like we're doing. Certain people have different gifts, but the idea is clear that Christ is yearning for us to fan the flame of the gifts that he's given us. And his expectation is that the gifts that we have are not to sit there in a pew and to warm it, to be a seat warmer. God is expecting us, and he gets the angriest actually in Scripture, not with the unfaithful people. It's with the faithful people that are not utilizing the gifts that he's given us for his glory. And so my encouragement would be that anyone that's coming into the church, and I would argue that we as an Orthodox church, like every Christian church, probably could do a lot better job in really engaging that. But it's identifying the gifts that God's given you. What do people compliment you on? What do you feel that God has put that you enjoy doing? What gives you life when you're doing it? Those are the things that, when you do that in a group, we call it the church. When you're doing that, it allows us an opportunity to come together as one. So we may not, every finger is different on the hand. We're all different. We're all going to have different personalities. But the idea is that we have one goal, and that goal is to build up his kingdom and for us to draw closer to Christ in that process.
Well, I want to ask you a follow-up question, though, about that, because you really hit the nail on the head, and you talked about the Gospel of John and how he talks about, and honestly, I have to tell you, I never noticed that before, but yes, he does speak about this idea of being together. And then he says this, a new command I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another, right? And it's like, bing, you really hit it on the head. So can I ask you a further question in terms of connection? Help us understand what it means to love someone past simply, what does love mean in that context? Does it mean a feeling? Like when I look at someone and I say, oh, I don't hate them, or I like them, or whatever. So what does it mean in the context of Jesus talking about all of this togetherness? And he says, love one another as I have loved you. In other words, I'm a parishioner in a parish and I lack this connection, and I read your book and I see that I need it. I see that I want to have connection with others. So what do I do to love someone in my community or in my family?
One of the things I would share with everyone is that I love, we have this, the beauty of in the Orthodox Church, where on that Holy Saturday night, as when we go out as priests, it's one of the most, I think, beautiful moments that we have, and one of the blessings that we have as a priest. One of the many, but this one, when you come out there and we say, come receive the unwaning light of Christ, and we have, the church is totally dark, and we take our candle and we light, other people's candles, and then they light other people's candles. And we have on Sundays when people come, or during the week when people come into church in that narthex, there's typically a candle that's already lit, and then we take our candle and we light that candle from the candle that's already in the sand, and then we light our candle. And then someone behind us for sure is going to do the same thing by taking their candle, their unlit candle, and then lighting it from our candle. And I thought that's a beautiful imagery, Father Tom, of how we are as Christians. That one of the things, one of the hallmarks of being a resurrected Christian, of being someone that is living out the resurrected Christ, is that we become sons and daughters of Christ, and therefore we look like our Father. Now, we have two children. They couldn't be polar opposites. They're different personalities. They have different ways of operating, different ways of acting, different ways they show love. They're all different. But at the end of the day, they know what the values and the I would say the vision that Roxanne and I have in our home, and that's what they follow. Like all of us, they all fall short, and we do too. As parents, we do things that are also wrong. But I think the key is recognizing that Christ did not just resurrect for me. He's resurrecting me so that I can share. I love how the Bible says that we should always be prepared to speak of the hope that we have in Christ Jesus. So the question I would ask you is, not you, but I mean the people that are listening or that may have that question is are you prepared? Are you truly connected to Christ? And being able to recognize that God is needing us. He's needing, maybe not be the best word, but he's looking at us. I'll leave it with this comment. I've always, every 2 or 3 times a year, Father Tom, I have this recurring dream, and it's a dream in which I'm standing before God the Father. I don't see God the Father. I don't know what he looks like. I just simply hear his voice, and the voice asks this question. And I use this at almost every retreat that I speak at, and I share all the time because it speaks to me so much, so profoundly. And I simply hear the voice of God saying, Nick, and he doesn't say Father Nick, it just simply says Nick. It says, Nick, what are you doing with my son? What are you doing with my son? And that's the question I would ask everyone here is, what are we doing with the risen Lord? In whatever capacity you have, whatever gifts that you have, the idea is that am I just simply a receiver? I'm just wanting to learn, because a lot of the young people that are coming in are just receiving a lot of information. Yes, you can be in a season of receiving, but there's going to come a time where you're going to be in a season of giving, and and allowing them to recognize that God's not expecting us just to be receivers. That's the easy part of Christianity. It's how do I make a difference in this world in His name?
Yeah, that's a very, very, very good point. And, I've often, I don't have the counseling acumen, and sometimes I speak a little bit more boldly to these young men, but I'll say, get out of your head.
Right.
Like, stop constantly thinking about yourself and what you believe. I heard a very interesting talk that said that the day that we are in, the secular age that we are in, is unprecedented because it is the result of hundreds and hundreds of years, starting with the Enlightenment, where eventually man overtakes the idea of God, and he himself becomes the measure of all things. And in a certain sense, when you see, and I know this is going to rub some people the wrong way, but it really changed my perspective on this. When you see all of these theological debates and everybody's got a channel about every religion and they're debating one another, and what happens is the young people, especially the young men, are watching these channels, and this is the worst part, they think they are making the decision about what is true, right? So they're going to say, I've watched all the videos and I know about all the heresies and I've read all the history and I have decided to become an Orthodox Christian. And I think our answer has to be, wait a second. Right. God is the one who is bringing you here, right? This is not about you and your understanding of things. I mean, there has to be a certain, understanding and decision. Right. I mean, even in the early church, the Jews had to be convinced of what Christ was saying was true. But ultimately, it has to be God that is calling you. So don't forget that there is, like you said, you can't forget, like, what are you doing with my son? What are you doing with Jesus? This is the most important thing. And they can talk about the filioque all day long. I had one guy tell me, he criticized me on my show because I said, I kept referring to Jesus and the Lord Jesus Christ. And he said, Orthodox Christians don't name Jesus. I said, what? What are you talking about? So, I agree with you 100%. Like, this has to be about Christ. This has to be about our connection with Jesus. All right. 1-855-AF radio. That's 1-855-237-2346, or send us a text message to 412-206-5012. Your book, and of course, let's remind our listeners, this is a magnificent book called 6 Hours, 7 Lessons. And we are speaking with the authors, Father Dr. Nicholas Louh and Dr. Roxanne Louh. And they are the authors of this outstanding book that looks at the so-called 7 last words of Christ on the cross and explores them from a theological, from a biblical, and from a psychological standpoint. And you open with the most difficult one. The most difficult one, which is forgiveness, right? You say something here, and it was an enigmatic phrase for me, and I want you to help me understand it. Dr. Roxanne, you both write, forgiveness is an unyielding desire for goodness, the good of others, the good of the world, the good of our souls. So I've never heard that put that way before. What if I don't desire goodness, or how can I increase goodness in myself and the desire for goodness in order to forgive one another? Why is in other words, why is forgiveness linked to the desire for goodness?
I mean, I think the reason the desire for goodness goes along with it is because if you don't desire goodness, if you're not operating out of a heart that desires, yearns for goodness, you will never make the decision toward forgiveness, because it becomes about self-preservation, preserving the righteous indignation that I have about what upset me. And I am not focused on goodness. I'm focused on justice. I'm focused on what you need to do to correct what you did. And I'm not going to be okay until you do. And I deserve this. And I think it doesn't matter what has happened. At some point, you have to, within the heart, have this unyielding desire to want goodness, like within, toward the person, toward the offense, toward the situation. You have to want that goodness, or else how do you ever get there? And we don't always want that, but it's an unyielding desire we have to come back to. So it's like anything else in life. There's order, then there's disorder, then we reorder it again, right? There's order, there's disorder, we reorder it and get back, toward goodness. So I think, we come to church, we read God's promises, we read scripture, we're focused on goodness. We have a pure heart. Somebody upsets us. It's gone, disorder, right? Then we have to kind of have the heart that yields to goodness to reorder ourselves again, to sort of say, okay, no, I don't want to think that way. Whoa, that doesn't sound like it's from Christ. The way I'm thinking is from the enemy. What is happening right now? And we kind of come back to sort of reeling ourselves back in. But if you don't have that desire for goodness, like, why would I do any of that? Mm-hmm. I'm going to let those thoughts simmer. I'm going to fuel them, in fact. I'm going to build up this urge to sort of devour the person who just did whatever they did. So I do think it kind of comes back to unyielding. I mean, I don't want anything to stop me from desiring that goodness. Even when something disrupts it, I come back to it.
Right.
And I was just gonna add to what you was saying, if that's okay, Father Tom.
Please.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's amazing because we obviously, we don't know the exact order because the scriptures as the last sentence in John says, that there were many things that Jesus said and did that are not recorded in scripture. But at least chronologically, in what we do know, at least what's written, and that's the very first statement that Christ makes. And so I think that's something that's important to recognize, that, you can always tell how important something is in someone's life by the priority they place on it. And here he is, this is someone whose body is maimed, it's mangled. It's, we read in the prophet Isaiah, talks about that he's being really in many ways beyond recognition, and he's been crushed, all for us. And what we have to recognize is that in that moment, Christ was not thinking about his self-preservation or his righteous indignation towards the people that he's God. I mean, he was the one that was taking care of them. A week ago, they were waving palms. Now they're saying, crucify him. And yet, in that moment, I think it's revealing to us that a couple of things. One is, we're going to have people that are going to upset us. We're going to have people that sometimes those are little hurts, and sometimes those are big hurts. Those are hurts that cut us and scar us. But if we recognize that, I love this quote that says that, to forgive is to set a prisoner free, only to realize that we have been the prisoner. And the reality is that when we don't forgive, we are basically locking up our soul. And I don't know about you, but I've had people that have offended and hurt me. I don't want to give those people any more power in my life to lock up my soul. And so when I start reflecting on the fact that my soul is too valuable to allow those people to continue to hurt me. So in many ways, my relationship with Christ is much more important to me than the hurt that they caused in my life, and also that I've also caused in other people's lives. So I tell people oftentimes, and you've heard this before, Father Tom, is that the vertical shapes the horizontal, that my vertical relationship with Christ will allow me to have that horizontal relationship, as you were mentioning earlier, that commandment that Christ shares with others, that when I love God, I can love them. So number one, I would tell people, trust God. I mean, Christ tells us that he will take care of those who have hurt us, and he'll take care of us who have hurt other people. He tells us to pray for people. He says, I tell you to love your enemies, but pray for those who persecute you. And then he tells us to bless them. Like, in other words, he says, I tell you to love your enemies, do good to them, but bless those who curse you. I mean, and sometimes we don't want to bless them. And I love this quote from St. John Chrysostom that says that we should let the mouth also fast from disgraceful speeches and railings. For what is it profit if we abstain from fish and fowl and chicken, basically, and yet bite and devour our brothers and sisters?
Yes.
And so things that and obviously we recognize that we're called to love people. That Bible says, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. So I just would say, let your soul be free. And we're not minimizing what people do to hurt us. We're not saying don't be upset about it. Those are normal things.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that just a little further, because I think that often when people think about forgiveness, and you have a really, it's just a wonderful, helpful section called Dispelling Myths About Forgiveness. It's just perfect. And you go through these myths, you say, it's easy, right? It minimizes or forgets the offense. It's a two-player game. It's about what is fair. It's about agreeing with the other person. And you hear this all the time. You'll say, look, I can't forgive this person because I don't talk to them anymore. I can't forgive this person because I simply don't agree with them. I can't forgive this person because they don't want to forgive me. I can't forgive this person because it's not fair what they did to me, right? So how do we approach people that are saying these things, like putting rules around forgiveness? Maybe that's the question. What are the rules around forgiveness? What are the conditions under which have to be present in order for us to forgive?
Yeah, you want to start with that, Roxanne?
So
I can, it doesn't matter.
You're asking, Father Tom, what are the conditions we are putting on our forgiveness?
I'm sort of asking in a playful way. I'm saying that people say, look, this person has to want to forgive me. This person has to agree that they were wrong. This person has to be around. In other words, is that true? Does the person have to agree with me in order for me to forgive them?
They probably won't. Yeah, no.
Do I have to agree with them?
Yeah, no. Listen, I think there's so much we learn and discover about ourselves through the offense itself. And ultimately, in studying that offense, I'm learning how to live in right relationship to God. It becomes transformative for me. To sort of walk through that. So it's not about the other person. And actually, what the person did to you, I will often say, has a lifetime of story behind it that had nothing to do with you. Their whole life leading up to that moment is what caused that moment. It's not about you. So, we can't really take it too much to be about us. And in that moment, we're sort of deciding, what do we do with this person? And then what do I do with the offense? It's two different things altogether. We don't necessarily have to go and try to be close to, someone. I remember when our kids were small, there was a little girl in my daughter's class who was really offensive on a number of levels and doing some things, saying some things that were entirely inappropriate. And I remember the school counselor calling me and saying, well, we really want them to be friends, and we really want your daughter to, work with her and talk to her. And I said, they don't share the same values. These behaviors are hurtful and harmful. And I don't want my daughter to learn that that's what a healthy relationship looks like. So I actually think appropriate boundaries are in order. That doesn't mean we walk around resentful about who this person is. That doesn't mean we have negative narratives about her in our mind. That doesn't mean we don't say a prayer for her, because God only knows there's a context that created that behavior that probably had nothing to do with us, right? And not everybody had the same opportunities when it came to learning how to love or be in a relationship or be kind, right? So why am I going to waste time sort of judging or holding on to that anger? But at the same time, I'm still going to set a boundary, because that's not a healthy relationship.
Yeah,
right?
No, I agree. I think that's very important for people to understand. There are still consequences to people's behavior, right? The most extreme being if someone kills someone else in your family, you can forgive that person. They're still going to jail. That's the bottom line. Let's bring on a caller here. We have John from North Carolina. John, welcome to Ancient Faith Today. You're on the line with the Louhs.
Good evening, Father Tom and Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I had a question trying to connect all of the topics you've been talking about in the last few minutes. You spoke about converts who have kind of been joining this wave into orthodoxy the last several years. And I've been trying to As I've mentioned before, Father Tom, I'm calling on the show. I teach a 12th grade Sunday school class, many of which I get the opportunity to bring to your church this weekend, Father Nick. And we talk about theosis, and we talk about goodness and being good people, and we talk about forgiveness and being Christ-like in that way. And it's hard, and it was hard when I was in high school, but it's hard for these kids these days to really grasp that forgiveness concept because of what they experience in their social circles and in school. But they've noticed, and I've obviously noticed, the amount of people who are joining the church, but young people, college students, even high schoolers with their parents, and many coming into the church without their parents in high school. And so they ask, like, how are we supposed to learn how to, learn about theosis and learn about being good and learning about forgiveness and all of these things? Well, we feel like our faith has kind of been just given to us in the sense that we haven't appreciated it as much as these people who are coming and learning about orthodoxy for the first time. So, and I even feel it as a young adult who's grown up in the church and has, had many transfiguration moments of my own to really reclaim my faith. But what could you offer, Father Nick, or really all of y'all, to encourage those who have maybe been in the church longer, trying to learn how to be good, learning how to forgive, not feel so intimidated by these people coming into the church?
That's a wonderful, wonderful question. Either one of you, please begin. Give us your thoughts about convert versus cradle, people being in the church a long time, new people coming in, that whole dynamic. Excellent question. Thanks,
we have
John.
similar stories, so Nick, I'll let you go ahead because I know we feel the same on this.
Thank you, Roxanne. I think that, first of all, thanks so much for the call, and look forward to having you all in our church this Sunday. I think that there's a number of ways to answer this. I think first and foremost is to recognize that my church, or the Orthodox Church, is not my church. It's God's church. God established this church. We hear about this in the book of Ephesians. And he shares that he is the great hierarch. That's why on most of our icon screens, or at least on the throne, we have the great hierarch. The icon of Christ is the great hierarch, that he's the one truly leading this church. And we are all sons and daughters of his. And at the end of liturgy, when we say, save our God and bless your inheritance, that we would argue that we are the inheritance, that through the resurrection, we become his children. Having said that, I think that the beautiful thing is that for years and years, we would talk about, how orthodoxy is the best kept secret. And we were wondering, why aren't people recognizing this and seeing the Orthodox Church? Well, now they are. And yes, they are coming. And it depends. I'll be honest with you. I travel a lot. Not every church is experiencing that. I think the churches that are the ones that are really open to allowing people to come into their church and connecting them through the worship to the church. But I think that one of the things that I think that for me, growing up as an Orthodox, I'm actually serving the church that I grew up in. So I when I was growing up, in a very simplistic way, I stood when everyone stood. I did my cross when everyone did my cross. And I really had no idea what I was doing. I just simply did when everyone else was doing. It was like being at a football game and they're doing the wave and you're the next one up and you have to stand up. And so I had an experience. I'll just give this briefly. I know that we're limited on time, but I will say that I remember when I was in high school, I had a young friend of mine named Stephen who had invited me to his church. He went to a Protestant church here in Jacksonville, and they were having a youth night where they were inviting all these different. The students were asked to bring friends of theirs to this youth night to share with them about their church. And so my friend said, "Would you like to go?" I said, "Sure, absolutely." So I go there, and I was so amazed at how all the young people were holding their Bibles and knowing their Bible verses. And it's a little bit different than what I obviously grew up with. But all I knew growing up was that I'm Orthodox, and the Orthodox Church is the true church. That's all I knew. Why it was, how it was, I had no idea. And so naturally, as you can expect, the youth pastor is going around asking these different kids, these that were invited, tell us about what church you go to, or do you go to a church? And so long story short, they get up to me and they said, Nick, what church are you from? And I said, I'm from this church, and we are the true church. Have you ever heard of the Orthodox Church? In a very, passionate way. And I'll never forget what he said to me. And it really became it became a catalyst for me learning about my faith. He said to me, Nick, I've heard of the Orthodox Church. In fact, I've studied the Orthodox Church. I love the Orthodox Church. He goes, but the problem is that I'm still waiting to actually see the Orthodox Church, to see the Orthodox Church in action. And then he flipped it around. He says, Nick, why are you Orthodox? Why do you go to church? What is your relationship with your church and with Christ?
Right.
And I could not answer those questions because for me, everything was so external, but nothing was internal. So it launched that. And so one of the things that we work on, and Father Tom, I love your show because you do this all the time, is really trying to make our faith very practical. I mean, it's hard. It's a deep end of the pool kind of a faith, but it is a faith that if we can apply parts of it to our life, it's a game changer. But I would say that as Orthodox, we need to go through our own catechism. Like we need to have our own catechism in coming back into our church and studying about the church, not just in an intellectual way, which is what we were talking about earlier, but really in a very real way. And connecting with that in a sincere way. So I would encourage you and in your class to really ask the young people that are your students, what is your relationship with Christ? What is your relationship with the church? What does the church mean to you? And kind of delve into those questions, and then giving them tools on how to cultivate that relationship through the church, through reading the Bible, etc.
Dr. Roxanne? Anything to add there?
Very similar experience to Father. So, I mean, I won't, go over my whole story, but, genuinely, I was born and raised in the Orthodox Church. And I have to say, I did not feel as though the true identity of the Orthodox Church was made accessible to me on a level where I could say, oh, that's right in front of me, I can learn about it. Oh, that answer's right there. Like, oh, that makes sense. It was mysterious. And it was something that I participated in a very, spiritual level, but I wouldn't say I understood the vastness of this faith that we have. I mean, it's just tremendous. I feel like I could read about it from here until the end of time, and I still wouldn't know all the writings of the Church Fathers. I mean, I wouldn't know the depth of everything, the history, and we read a lot, So, I would say let it inspire you, when you come into something new, people are excited, and I think that excitement should rejuvenate and reignite our own desire to learn, hey, why do I do this one thing? Why do we do this? Just explore one question per week. And there you have it. It will begin a journey that Nick, you ran into. Like you started asking about your faith, and that one question leads to more questions. And so let it ignite you.
Father Tom, I was just going to add real quick before you share those comments too, is, for many of us who are first generation, many of our parents came from overseas. When we came to this country, we were considered to be the outsiders, and we were considered to be different, and the last thing we want to do is to perpetuate that in the church. To when people are coming in, that we're treating them as if they're immigrants coming into our community and treating them as if they don't belong here. So I would just challenge you all to remember our own history and how what we experienced, which sometimes was not that great when we came to this country, and not wanting to repeat that in our own churches.
That's a very good point. Yeah, and I'll say for my own, just very, very briefly, and John, thank you very much for your question. I come from a family of priests, and my dad was a priest, my grandfather was a priest, 2 uncles were priests, great uncle were priests, my brothers went to seminary, I went to seminary. And so it's very much a part of my DNA. However, even I am inspired by people that come and give up everything. They give up jobs, they give up a pastorate, they give up their former church families to receive the pearl of great price, Jesus, in the Orthodox faith. So I think that desire is very worthy of emulation. But I want to say something also to the converts, because, this, I think, to a certain extent, our various jurisdictions have been going through this at different rates and different times, right? So we're a little bit more ahead of the curve in terms of dealing with converts. And the one thing that we're seeing is some of the converts that are coming in are not rooted in the church. In other words, they are very attracted, they read, they're very well read, they want to do this, they get chrismated or baptized or whatever, but then 2, 3, 4 years later, boom, they're gone. And what we can learn from Cradle Orthodox is perseverance, is the ability to withstand, this person looked at me wrong, or this person sat in my pew, or this person didn't whatever, And I think we can learn from each other. The Cradle Orthodox can learn this desire for Christ and for the truth from the converts, but the converts can learn perseverance and sacrifice, right? And centering their lives in the church like our parents and grandparents did, where like everything they did was around the church. It was every night.
Everything.
So that's a good thing. All right, John, thank you so much for calling. We're a little bit over time. I'm going to go to one question that came in our chat. In the text line, 412-206-5002. And it says, can you talk about forgiveness and parenting, please, and how that impacts children? For example, if my daughter does something she needs to apologize for, I should also let her know that I forgive her. So let's just say forgiveness in a family context. Dr. Roxanne, you want to talk about that? And then we're going to wrap it up.
I think that's a beautiful question. I mean, I just believe so much that children will live exactly what they see. And so when you are offended, how you walk through that is going to be what they emulate. It's going to be the value that they take on. And so, I think we have to talk about what went wrong, but I think we have to do it in relationship preservation mode. Like, my number one goal here is to preserve this relationship. So no matter what I am talking to you about, no matter what you said that was wrong, no matter what I said that was wrong, we are within the confines of trying to preserve this relationship. And so that relationship that we're preserving is not just the one in front of us, but also the one we have with Christ. And so if that is my number one focus, and I'm preserving that relationship with Christ, that's how I'm navigating that conversation in everything I say. That's how I'm approaching it. That's why I'm compassionate. That's why I'm merciful. That's why we talk through it. And so it would breed a lot of healing and reconciliation, specifically within, family between parent and child. Unless of course there are grave, violent, acts that we kind of have to sort of take a different route there. But forgiveness is going to be something that emulate because of the way that you approach it. And so I do believe as a parent, we are literally setting the example for our kids on, whether we become righteous or whether we're willing to see through and still remember that person's goodness despite their offense and talk through it in ways that heal.
Excellent. Father Nick?
I think, Roxanne, you did such a great job on that. I think it's so true that just remembering that everything that we do, our children are like sponges now, no matter how old or how young they are. So we, like the old adage goes, more is caught than taught. So I would model every time, and we make mistakes. I mean, there have been many a times that I will tell you that we have stood before our children and said, hey, I'm sorry I acted that way. That's not the kind of parent I want to be to you, even when they were young. Not because we were, which is very different than sometimes what we hear people doing, but we wanted them to see firsthand that how we need that as parents, we own when we've done something that we shouldn't have done or acted in a way that we shouldn't have acted, and trying to guide them in the way that we want them to live themselves. And so I think that remembering that our children are watching us and being very careful how we live and how we act in front of them is so important.
Excellent. Thank you guys so much. So let's remind our listeners, 6 hours, 7 lessons, how Christ's light transcends our darkness. And you can purchase that right now at store.ancientfaith.com. Reverend Dr. Nicholas Louh and Dr. Roxanne Louh, thank you guys for joining us tonight. It was a long night for you. You had your show before you joined us. I really appreciate everything that you do. May God continue to bless you and increase your ministry.
Thank you, Father
Thanks,
Tom.
Father.
We feel the same way about you and your ministry.
Absolutely.
So thanks for the opportunity to be on your show.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming tonight. And also, before we share a few final thoughts, I want to offer also my thanks to Matushka Trudy, to Simon, to Melissa Graff, for everybody that's listening in, for the callers, for our text messages and comments, and of course, to our guests. This is the week of the veneration of the life-giving and precious cross, and how appropriate it is that we're looking at some of these so-called, and I only say so-called because, as our guests acknowledged, there are different ways of looking at the last words depending on the tradition, on the gospel writer, and so forth. But just to read through them, Jesus said and it's in Luke 23, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Right? This idea of forgiving other people, it's so important. Luke 23:43, "Today you will be with me in paradise." And the Louhs talked about looking at yourself, reviewing yourself. And of course, in some of our Orthodox traditions, we have that bottom bar on the cross that is crooked, right? And the thief on the right, it's pointing upwards. He is the one who was received into paradise. John 19:26, "Woman, behold your son." And then, of course, he turns to John, "Behold your mother." So this idea of connection, so very, very important. Matthew 27:46, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Probably the most enigmatic phrase of Jesus on the cross. What does that mean, to be abandoned, to be forsaken? Jesus saying in John 19:28, "I thirst," right? And they talk in their book about self-care. Very, very interesting how we can not be ashamed to have to take care of ourselves, because we lead very busy lives. We have many responsibilities, but we do have to pay attention to our own selves. Of course, Jesus says, John 19, "It is finished," or "it is accomplished," "it is consummated," right? How important this is to see that Jesus himself is the King of glory, is the King of our lives. And this is very, very important. And we are constantly acknowledging him, crowning him as King. And then finally, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." So all of these sayings are very, very important as we go through the week of the cross tonight. Let's remember those last words of Christ. And that's our show for tonight. Remember to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Ancient Faith Today. Share out our program after that's posted. Give us your feedback and contact us with any ideas or topics that you might want to hear about. Join us next Tuesday evening for another edition of Ancient Faith Today. Good night, everybody.